Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we have for you today. With inflation at a 40-year high, President Biden was in North Carolina today trying to reassure America that he's doing something about it. We'll take a look at his plan of action. The Chinese Communist Party disrupted the global economy when they mishandled the CCP virus, allowing it to spread around the world. How is the CCP continuing to impact the global economy and the supply chain? We'll take a look. And Elon Musk wants to unlock Twitter's extraordinary potential, so he's offering to buy it for $43 billion. We'll give you the story. 6 U.S. lawmakers paid a surprise visit to Taiwan. What's expected as they plan to meet with the Taiwanese president, and how is Beijing responding? Inflation is getting higher and President Biden's poll ratings are sinking. And today, Biden sought to reassure the American people that his administration is taking steps to lower costs for Americans. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more of Biden's plan.
$90 billion in research and development, STEM education, manufacturing, all those elements of the supply chain that we need to produce end products right here in America.
That's the crux of his plan to try to ease this red-hot inflation, now at a 40-year high. Facing mounting pressure to get these soaring prices under control, the Biden administration is pinning his hopes on Congress to pass a new law that will invest in U.S. manufacturing, innovation, and technology. This bipartisan bill making its way through Congress would invest billions into colleges, along with the CHIPS Act to expand the U.S. capacity to produce computer chips. The idea is that by manufacturing more at home, the U.S. won't have to rely so heavily on foreign supply chains.
Other countries are racing ahead, but we can't afford to wait. So Congress, get this bipartisan bill to my desk.
Melina, we know Congress is on track to pass this bill that Biden's calling for. Can you tell us more about where Congress is with this effort?
Well, Steve, Congress is on track to go to conference on this bill once they come back from their Easter recess. And that means that both the House and the Senate will come together and work out the differences between the two different versions of the bill and come to a final agreement. And it's looking like after they do come to an agreement, it's highly likely to pass through Congress. And that's because we saw enough bipartisan support for this bill to pass through the Senate. And what from the rhetoric that we've heard from both parties, it looks like they're really prioritizing this enough to come to an agreement that enough members can get on board with to get it through Congress and send it to Biden's desk. Steve, back to you.
Melina Wisecup reporting. And the world continues to suffer from the effects of China's mishandling of the CCP virus outbreak in the early stages of the pandemic. That's when they allowed the virus to escape all over the world, all the while shutting down travel within China. More than 2 years later, China's actions in handling the CCP virus continue to plague the world, with draconian lockdowns in Shanghai set to send reverberations to the global supply chain. We have CEO of American shipping and logistics company Alba Wheels Up, Sal Stile. Sal Stile, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to first start by asking you, what type of changes have you personally experienced in your business over the last year or so since the supply chain crisis and inflation?
Well, I've had a myriad of changes, especially with the inability to secure sometimes capacity from the steamship lines. We've had a market where rates have been fluctuating to the highest peak in the last 30 years. I've had clients that have tremendous cash flow issues because in addition to these high rates that they're experiencing, a lot of the factories in China and other parts of the world are requesting for larger deposits before they start making goods. A lot of the factories who have also facilities and factories in Vietnam, because a lot of people wanted to leave China, also still have the same requirements. So it's really a melees of a tremendous amount of issues going on a literally day by day, week by week basis in the supply chain.
Now, specifically in the shipping industry, what do you think is driving such high costs?
Well, what's driving such high costs is the limited capacity of chassis, the overdemand of goods for the containers. The steamship lines Many of them now, especially with the China lockdown, are having blank sailings. But now when China comes back on and the factories reopen and so forth, you're going to see such a mass influx of goods coming in that everyone's going to be scrambling to get the container space. The rates are going to go high. And let's face it, the steamship lines made $200 billion last year collectively. They're businesses, and it's not like they're going to go to their board this year and say, oh, by the way, we made $50 million last year, but now we're only going to make $20 million this year because we're going to lower the rates. I think they have an obligation to their shareholders to get as much as they can. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of the U.S. consumer and many mid-sized and smaller-sized businesses. And putting that into perspective, out of the 11 major carriers that send goods to the United States, only one of them is American-owned, which is a quite small one. So we don't really have much to leverage politically, I would assume, especially in the U.S., to try to mitigate this problem.
So, Sal, where do you think the solution to relief lies, specifically, when it comes to the shipping industry?
Well, that's a good question. I think the solution, especially with congestion, we have to pause some of these regulatory over-the-road weight limitations. We have to really try to alleviate some of the congestion and the rules that are out in the West Coast ports. It's very hard for truckers to return empty containers. There's an appointment system that needs to be modernized a little bit better. So there's so many little issues in so many parts of the supply chain that when you collaboratively put them together, it just causes one big mess. I think automation, though, is something key that the interior ports and the West Coast, East Coast ports really have to embrace, because we're far behind our countries of our stature in trade in this area. So that's definitely an issue.
You touched upon China for a moment earlier. Now, China, specifically Shanghai right now, one of China's largest cities, 25 million people. One of the biggest ports in the world is very close to Shanghai, and it's seeing a major lockdown right now because of the virus. What type of ripple effects will these lockdowns have when a port like that is affected, do you think?
I think it's going to have tremendous ripple effects, because not only is the port shut down, the truckers are shut down, the warehouses around the area are shut down, the factories are shutting down because the factories only have so much capacity in their warehouse to make goods. So now you could see that they're probably going to be behind shipping out goods, especially for the summer. And I think this is going to have a ripple effect with goods coming in specifically into the East Coast, because a lot of companies have shifted from the West Coast because of the severe congestion. And I would say in the next 2 months, you're going to have the same problem you had in the West Coast and the East Coast with terrible, terrible delays and congestion. Added on top of all that, you have the Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, which is doing their negotiations sometime in May, because their contract ends in June. So could you imagine that if they don't come to terms with the Pacific Maritime Association and they don't have a new contract to their liking, and if they went on strike, that would decimate the entire Christmas season.
Sal Stile, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
A delegation of U.S. lawmakers has just landed in Taiwan, taking the world by surprise. The visit defies threats by Beijing and comes amid growing concerns about a possible Chinese invasion of the self-governing island. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
6 U.S. lawmakers arrived in Taiwan Thursday night on a previously unannounced trip. Leading the bipartisan delegation are Senator Bob Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. They're meeting on Friday with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and the island's defense minister.
China is looking at the Western response to the world unfolding in Ukraine, and it plans to consume its neighbor Taiwan in the same fashion.
The surprise visit comes as lawmakers are increasingly wary of a possible invasion by Beijing into the democratically ruled island, which the Chinese Communist Party claims as its own. And just last month, to assure Taipei of U.S. support, President Biden sent a delegation of former defense officials to visit the island. It was amid heightened concerns of Beijing's next steps following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A spokesperson for the Taiwanese government said the latest visit is again a demonstration of the U.S.'s rock-solid support to Taiwan. And Senator Graham tweeted after landing that he's honored to visit what he calls a beacon of freedom in a troubled region. Meanwhile, the visit is drawing a furious response from Beijing, which on Thursday threatened that it would take forceful measures to defend Chinese territorial integrity. But such claims are challenged by the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who is warning Beijing over its close ties with Russia.
China cannot expect the global community to respect its appeals to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity in the future if it does not respect these principles now when it counts.
And after wrapping up their 2-day trip to Taiwan, the lawmakers will then head to Japan for top-level talks on China. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Elon Musk is offering to buy 100% of Twitter for about $43 billion. That's roughly $54 per share. He filed the offer with the Securities and Exchange Commission earlier today. Musk attached a letter with the SEC filing saying that Twitter has extraordinary potential that he can unlock. The tech mogul has repeatedly called Twitter's commitment to free speech into question. His letter also says that free speech is a societal imperative for a functioning democracy. Musk already owns over 9% of the company. The move to buy the rest amounts to an offer to transform Twitter into his own private company. That would give Musk complete control of how it's run. And Pfizer is going to ask the FDA to approve its vaccine booster for children ages 5 to 11. The drug maker says its booster shot increases antibodies against Omicron for kids within that age group. In a small study, Pfizer gave 140 vaccinated kids a booster 6 months after their initial 2 shots. There was a 36-fold increase in antibodies against Omicron in 30 of the children. Back in February, the data collected by New York health officials showed that the Pfizer vaccine was not effective for this age group, but they still considered the shots helpful in preventing hospitalization. Neither study has been independently evaluated. Pfizer will make its request to the FDA in the coming days. The suspect in the New York City subway shooting made his first appearance in court today. The judge ordered him to be held with no bail. And in the wake of the mass shooting that took place in New York City's subway, a question is being asked: are woke politics making cities around the country less safe? We speak to a U.S. congresswoman who represents part of New York City to get her thoughts. The Supreme Court will soon rule on abortion laws, but some states are moving ahead. Today, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that would place limits on abortions in Florida. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. Today in New York, a judge ordered the suspect in the Brooklyn subway shooting to be held without bail at his first court appearance. 62-year-old Frank James is charged with a domestic terrorism charge and a violent attack against a mass transportation system. He did not enter a plea. James's lawyers are asking for a psychiatric evaluation. This comes 2 days after the shooting took place in a rush-hour subway train. Authorities say James set off smoke grenades and then opened fire. 10 people were shot. James was arrested yesterday after a 30-hour manhunt. He reportedly called the police hotline to turn himself in. New York City has been reeling from an uptick in violent crime, with the latest high-profile instance playing out in New York City subway, where at least 10 people were shot 2 days ago. Here to discuss the ongoing crisis, we have Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who represents part of New York City in her district. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Congresswoman, with regard to the shooting in the New York City subway 2 days ago, prior to the suspect being apprehended, what was the feeling like among New Yorkers knowing this madman was still on the loose?
Well, people are certainly on edge, even after the subway shooter was caught, because we have a crime problem in New York City. Unfortunately, policies put in place by those who control our city and our state government have created an environment where crime is being attracted. The criminal element is being attracted in our city. So yesterday's incident was a horrific one, and it was the most high-profile one we've seen in some time on our subways. But the reality is that crime is up 65% in our transit system, despite the fact that we still have half the ridership than we did pre-COVID. So people are being attacked, robbed, sex crimes happening on our subways. There are hate crimes that are happening, people being assaulted and shoved in front of trains, stabbed. So there is a serious criminal element here that has been created by the policies put in place by the Democrats that run City Hall and our state capitol.
Congresswoman, is there any concern that political correctness has seeped its way into the public security sphere, thereby making the public less safe?
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, you just have a bunch of left-wing Democrat politicians who have decided that they were going to make the job of the police officers more difficult. They think, wrongfully, that they know how to do the job better than the cop that's on the street. And we need to do more to listen to our police, give them the tools that they're asking for, and help them do their job. Instead, what we have are these politicians that are tying their hands, taking away their resources, and changing laws so people are not being kept behind bars. One of the things that I've done as a member of Congress has been to push for federal resources. We were successful in getting millions of dollars for protective equipment, forensic equipment, as well as the NYPD K-9 unit. And I'm proud of that, because when a lot of politicians are talking about defunding the police, I'm out there doing what I can to deliver more resources to help them do their job. But we have to recognize that the laws in New York have to change if we are to restore public safety. Albany right now and our governor have refused to fix the radical bail law. And if that's the case, we need to replace them. The other issue is the idea that they want to close Rikers Island and open up a jail in the boroughs, in each borough. I'm opposed to that plan. I think instead, let's invest resources that you would use to build a jail and put it in Rikers Island to modernize the facility, update the buildings, make sure that it's safe for both inmates and officers. But Rikers Island is where it should be, because people have tried to escape Rikers Island and have not gotten away because it's just that, an island. But now if you take those individuals and you put them in jails in the boroughs, if they get out, what's going to happen? They'll be running across the neighborhood. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to have a jail in their backyard. So I urge the mayor and the Democrats to abandon that plan, and let's have some common sense here.
So you raised the issue of politicians calling to defund the police. Police officers are human beings, after all. After being demoralized by certain public figures, which then has the trickle effect of creating a hostile environment from the public who's influenced by these ideas, do you think there needs to be a culture shift where there's more public support for law enforcement from these cultural figures and so-called influencers, if you will?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are demonizing and villainizing our police officers. And we only need to look at what occurred yesterday, where the police were there to take action, find this individual within 24 hours. And I think they would have found them sooner had they not been stripped of their resources over time, and we had the security cameras working in cooperation with the NYPD and MTA. But the reality is that we have to support our police, and there's been too much anti-police rhetoric coming from leaders in our city and state government, and those who are in federal government as well, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She has protested putting police on subways. I've been advocating for police on subways, and you know what? At the end of the day, now they're going to be adding them. But what if we had more police on subways prior to yesterday? perhaps this horrific crime could have been stopped. So I think it's incredibly important that the community show support for the police, which they are doing. And as a matter of fact, the polling suggests that 3/4 of the people in New York State want more law enforcement, they want more cops on the street, and they fear that they say that public safety is the #1 issue for them this election cycle. And I think it's really important for politicians to hear, so they change course.
Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, thank you so much.
It's great to be with you again. Thank you.
Russia has confirmed that one of its major warships in the Black Sea has been evacuated after being seriously damaged. Russia and Ukraine have different versions of what happened, and a U.S. official called it a big blow to Russia. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says the Russian warship suffered extensive damage.
Actually, we're not quite exactly sure what happened here. We do assess that there was an explosion, at least one explosion on this cruiser, a fairly major one at that, that has caused extensive damage to the ship.
Russia said Thursday that the flagship of its Black Sea fleet was seriously damaged by an explosion, and its crew was evacuated. It didn't say what caused the fire, but Ukraine's military says it was hit by Ukrainian missiles. While Ukraine says the ship sunk, Russia says it's still afloat.
We don't have the capacity at this point to independently verify that, but certainly the way that this unfolded, it's a big blow to Russia.
And President Biden says his administration is weighing whether to send senior U.S. officials to Ukraine.
We're making that decision now.
The Biden administration Wednesday announced an additional $800 million in U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Russia is sanctioning U.S. lawmakers. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced today that they're giving 398 U.S. Congress members minor sanctions and banning them from entering Russia. The ministry's statement includes a list of U.S. members of Congress. Russia says this is in response to the Biden administration's wave of sanctions against Russia, against over 300 members of Russia's own legislative body. About 41 House members are left off the list. They include 27 Democrats and 14 Republicans. Among them are California Democrats Maxine Waters and Eric Swalwell, as well as Republicans Adam Kinzinger of Illinois and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. It's not clear at this point how Russia decided who got sanctioned and who did not, but the ministry mentions House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They say that Pelosi was not included because she is already banned from entering Russia. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill into law today banning abortions after 15 weeks. The state is joining a growing push to restrict abortion access ahead of an upcoming Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade.
This will represent the most significant protections for life that have been enacted in this state in a generation.
Florida currently allows abortions up to 24 weeks. The new law takes effect July 1st. There are exceptions if the abortion is necessary to save a mother's life, prevent serious injury, or if the fetus has fatal abnormalities. That's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you again tomorrow.